the trends in corporate finance, the expense management to smart spending. This panel is joined by David Parker and Bas Jensen. David's a fintech expert with a ton of knowledge about payments and expense management. As a founder of Pelham Consulting, he advises in some of the biggest names in the industry. He also is involved in open banking in the UK. So if you're curious about fintech, I would really be really interested you're going to be leaning into this as well as you possibly can. David will be interviewed by Bas. Bas is the go-to guy when it comes to all things of innovation at Mobilexpense and the founder of Declare. From leading initiatives like credit cards, CO2 reporting, Bas is helping shape the future of finance. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Well, welcome. Although I said I'm going to be interviewing you, I think it's actually going to be more of a conversation this week, or a debate, shall we say, between us. We've got some views I know we don't 100% agree on, so we'll take it from there. And, we'll have a conversation, but ask your questions for the audience as well, and I'm sure we'll get them fed in as well. So, where are we going to start off?
Well, David, we're going to discuss the trends that we see in business finance and corporate finance, if you will. And I wanted to start off by asking you, as a judge, for example, on several different awards, for example, the Pay 360 Awards, Open Banking Awards, International Loyalty Awards. What is like the things that you see? What is like the best practices that you see or innovations that you see coming around in the market today?
I'll tell you what. Let's go broader. I think post-COVID, the European market as a whole is actually relatively buoyant. And what that means is we're seeing people are doing their best to attract workers. And I think we're seeing a change in how people and companies relate to employee expenses. And what I mean by that is, if we go back 5-10 years ago, doing an expense claim was a pain. And now it's got to the point where companies and people going to work for companies are almost saying, if I'm going to go and work there, I want my life easy. Don't make my life hard. So it's almost like HR is saying to the finance team, hey guys, don't make these guys' lives hassle. We want to employ them. So they've got to actually almost be thinking, like they think of customer experience, they're thinking almost of the employee experience, making their lives easy to work there, and part of that is running the expenses and enabling them not to spend their own money and stuff like that. So I think there's a big change in how you use expenses as a tool to help attract staff and keep staff. I also think the second one, it sort of ties into this, is that FDs these days, they hear a lot about big data and all this stuff, and there's lots of acronyms thrown around the place. But I think it's being able to say, well, if we spent this in the last 3 months, I've got a budget of this. What's my predictive? Where am I going? If I know what I spent last year, can I use that to help me understand my budgets for next year? So I think expenses, other than it used to be a black hole where you just put a number there. I think we're using the data and the analytics to help predict things in the future.
So like really visibility on data is something that's really necessary today.
Visibility of data, but also by using that data. You always had visibility of it, but you could never use it. Now you can actually start using it for the future. And I think that's a big thing. But hey, we talked about a couple of key trends, didn't we, beforehand? So I know we were going to go through those. But before we do that, can you just tell me a little bit about the Mobilexpense journey or the history? Because I think that'd be useful for the audience.
Sure, David. That's and it actually ties into the trends that you see, because Mobilexpense is actually already 24 years old. So it was founded in the year 2000 with the name Mobilexpense, which Thibaut already explained today is actually interesting, because back then nobody had a mobile phone in his pocket, or at least not a smartphone.
We had the old Nokias. Come on, the old Nokia bricks. I had one of them. I'm old enough. No hair.
Very strong phones back then, indeed. So. But Declare, the company that I founded, was actually only founded in 2014, and there was a little different approach to it, because while Mobilexpense was founded with the idea to help enterprise clients have a compliant expense process in many countries in the world, we founded Declare with the conception of of the employee to servicing the employee. Why can I not make a picture of my receipt when I have a mobile phone in my pocket? So really the drive for the support of the employee was the foundation of Dictory. Then in 2019 we merged with Mobilexpense, which is great actually, because now we have the combination of the innovation and the UX for employees combined with international compliance. So I think that's a great journey that we've been in so far. And then of course, like you said, COVID happened. And we've seen a lot of changes because of COVID. First of all, travel has changed. But also I think the nature of expense management has changed a lot as well.
Travel has changed? It's an interesting statement that. Why? People travel less, more?
Well, of course, because of COVID, there was a lot less travel suddenly, and then in a very short time frame, companies got used to using Teams and other digital tools to have meetings online. We do see that travel has picked up a lot since COVID, but we also see that companies approach travel differently. For example, instead of only focusing on servicing their employees with hotels and planes and trains, companies also are thinking about how do I service my employees with mobility solutions and things like that. And also I believe that travel solutions have picked up a lot of innovations for, I think, duty of care is something that's really important nowadays. If there's going to be a next pandemic, we have to be prepared, of course. So I think overall there's a lot of changes in the industry that we've seen.
Okay. Let's talk about some of these trends now, because I think together we managed to identify 6 key trends that we're going to cover off here. And I'm going to kick off by really talking about something that's probably in some ways the hottest 2 letters out there, AI. I don't think you get any hotter than that. AI spend management, and it's certainly one of the key things out there. And I'm just wondering how you see this changing. I mean, I probably talked a little bit about the predictive analysis, but how do you see this changing the landscape of expense management out there? Because I think it's got a big impact.
I think you're right, David. So we've been using AI for a long time already, but that was essentially rule-based AI, and we are using AI nowadays really to capture data from invoices and from receipts to really understand everything what's on the receipt, from the VAT to the line items to to currency, etc. But I think now with AI, with large language models, there's much more possible in expense management. You can think about, for example, let's say a company has a expense policy of 80 pages long. Do you want to program all those different policies as functional business rules into a solution? Or could you use a large language model to automatically capture expenses that are not compliant with the policy and flag those, for example, to the FD? Not making the decision for the FD, but ensuring that the FD knows where to focus, which expenses are outliers, which expenses are outside normal behavior, if you will.
I just want to pick up on that point, if I may, because I like this idea. So expenses are coming in. In the old days, you might do an audit once a month on X number of employees just to check, because you're never going to go through line item on every single expense. Now you're saying the systems can do all that for you and just flag the ones that might be outside the policy. So actually, you're not only reducing your time, you're getting time used where it's created the greatest value, which is actually in making the decision, not finding the points to be made a decision on. Is that fair?
I think you're right. So I think there's a couple of different use cases or user roles, if you will, where these new AI functions can really be of play. So the employee, of course, has to ensure that the employee knows what can I spend, to extract the data when he spends, to automatically match invoices and receipts to credit card transactions, for example. This is something that these intelligent tools can do. Also, indeed, flagging expenses, checking against the policy, all those things is really helping the employee. Like it's an assistant for the employee, if you will. Then for managers want to know, indeed, are these expenses according to the budget? Is it booked on the correct project, etc. So this is also where AI can come into play to really help managers understand, can I approve this or not?
I like the idea that you just said then of the assistant, because I always think of the big bosses always have the executive assistant that manage all their expenses. Now you're saying effectively every employee can have their own executive assistant.
I think so. If I see the trends now, if I see the trend with AI, I really think that it's more of an assistant than a decision maker. Yeah, indeed.
Okay, let's move on to the second one. real-time payment solutions. How do you see, I suppose, the cards playing into that financial control? Because I think that's a key word. And the employee empowerment. I'm going to come back to my HR side of it again, which is giving, employees these days want to feel empowered. And I just wondered how you see that all coming together.
Yeah, I agree with employees wanted to be empowered. And we've had the experience with Mobilexpense for 2 decades now already with companies using credit cards. So traditionally, credit cards are not real time, and there's not many controls that you have around credit cards. And I think that companies would give some employees a credit card, typically the happy few, probably the management and some heavy travelers. But nowadays, with all the innovation that we've seen in banking and finance and fintech, it is possible to give employees a payment facility, being a credit card, if you will, with the grip and control for the company to actually manage all that. And now with Apple Pay and Google Pay and virtual cards coming into play, I think companies have the means to actually provide employees with that payment facility while still keeping that control and making sure that budgets are not overrun.
Okay, but I think a lot of companies, bigger companies, are going to say, I don't want my receptionist having the same credit limit as my top sales guy on the road. So control is great at the FD level in terms of one thing, but you're saying to me he can actually control on a card base. I think it's quite important when you're talking about control, because I know some markets particularly are quite nervous about giving too much to their employees as much as they want to empower them.
Yes, I fully agree. So I think that companies want to have the flexibility indeed to decide who can I give what kind of payment facility, who gets a credit card to travel internationally, and who gets a credit card, for example, to do office groceries, if you will, or to buy printing paper. And I think with modern solutions, this is actually possible. So you can set up different limits, for example, for cards, right? And employees can request a new card if they want, and then they can ask indeed for a specific budget, for a specific purpose, and then as a company.
So can I have event cards, or can the marketing team, for instance, have one card for my social media, but a different card for spending for other stuff, so they can keep things nominally ledger separate?
Well, exactly. This is what you can do with these innovations nowadays. So, for example, an employee that is traveling a lot, he can just have a normal plastic credit card that he has to use to check in hotels. Then you have the office manager that has a virtual card and pays for the office groceries. And then you have marketing that has maybe a different virtual card for each vendor, for Google, for Meta, for X, Twitter, right? So they have all these budgets under control and linked to a specific payment method. And then maybe when you have an event, then you need to buy something for the stand or the stand itself, then you can have a single-use credit card that you only use once for a specific payment, which is booked exactly against the right
So
ledger.
cards can actually be done on a per card expenses can be not only controlled on a per card basis, but the limit they actually be allocated to a specific event, like an event. So you can have an event card and manage it in that way as well.
Yeah, exactly. So nowadays it's possible to give employees the autonomy to spend wisely, while still as a company keeping spend under control.
That has moved forward then a long way. Okay, next hot thing probably out there is carbon counting. Now, we're finding listed companies. There's increasing national laws in some countries talking about how they got to keep track of things and everything else. And certainly there's a groundswell that many companies are wanting to understand better what their carbon footprint is out there. And your expenses is a good proportion of what you're spending totally. Are you moving to do that? What are you seeing in that trend, and what are you seeing as the options on that, and how accurate is it?
Yeah, we really recognize this as a very important trend. We see indeed changing legislation, as you say. So in many different countries, there's legislation coming into play where companies have to report on their CO2, on their carbon emissions, on many different levels. So it's about their building, for example, and it's about the cars that they use, but it's about actually everything. We really see that legislation is coming into place first to get insights about the measurement, about the carbon emissions before there's going to be like a reduction of carbon emissions. So one example is in the Netherlands, there's legislation now that has come into play in July this year, where every company with more than 100 employees, they need to report on their employee mobility carbon emissions. So this is of course a trend that we see in different countries, yeah.
So no, I'm just interested. So that they've particularly picked out mobility. I mean, it's not even just all their spend. So now you've actually got a subset of total expend you've got to report on. That makes it quite challenging for companies.
That is indeed challenging, and then mobility, I would say, is actually still easy, because if you know which car you drive and how far you drive, and you know the exhaust of the car, then it's an easy calculation. But what if companies want to report on all of their spend or all of the things that they do? They want to put a CO2 value to it. I really believe that CO2 might be the currency of the future in that sense. But let's say that you buy a pack of printing paper or you buy a cup of coffee. How much CO2 can you tie into that that spend? That's difficult. So we discussed before, we see many different carbon calculators coming to market that are trying to help companies and governments with this calculation. But it will, in my opinion, always be an approximation. But it all starts with the insights, and then we can move to reductions.
But can you get that insight from the data you're seeing and stuff? Do you get those insights? I suppose that's my first question as a company.
It's with different categories, there's different models to use. So right now, as I explained, for mobility, it's actually pretty straightforward. Still difficult, when you take the train and you want to know, you go from A to B, what is the exhaust of the train, or is it only an electrical train? So it depends on which model you use, what kind of outcome you get. But still, there's challenges, because if you make like a payment, then you don't get the CO2 value just with that. For example, if I go to the media market in the Netherlands, I can buy a fridge, or I can buy a pack of printing paper. So you don't know, because of the transaction, you don't know what the CO2 value is. So, but there's different tools in play now that you could use to actually approximate that value.
Okay, so it's coming. It's not there yet to the level of detail we'd hope.
What we see is that a lot of companies are intrinsically wanting to know their CO2 and their exhaust, and that's one trend. And the other trend is that governments and legislators are putting legislation.
So it's going in the right.
Place.
It's a trend. It's a real trend.
It's a real trend, but it's definitely not there yet.
Okay, I want to move on from that a little bit, if that's all right, and talk about compliance, because expenses and compliance are sort of two words that go hand in hand. And I think one of the trends we're seeing is the demand for what I'm going to call real-time reporting. It always used to be that you put your expenses in, if I expend it on the 1st of February, the expense, by the 30th of February, then or 28th of February, I've got to then, put my expenses claim in, and had to be in maybe by the 15th of the month. And then, it's all, I think there's a big change coming here in terms of what companies are looking for in terms of real time. I'd like to get your insights on that.
Yeah, well, I think your insights are very interesting here as well, because coming from open banking and all the innovations in fintech in the past couple of years, yes, I do believe that real-time data and real-time insights and real-time compliance is something that is possible today. So where companies used to have like monthly closures, and then they would see the expenses of the employee, and then you ask the employee, hey, what is this expense? Employee has no idea anymore. That was 2 or 3 months back. I think this is changing now. I think now if an employee spends something with his card, for example, and then the next day you could also already have those insights inside your company and do something about it. What do you think about that?
Well, I tell you what I'm thinking is, I'm going back to the first point we talked about, AI. And I think this is where the real-time reporting and AI piece comes together. Because, as I sort of jokingly said, an employee spends on the 1st of Feb. 28th of Feb, he gets told to submit his expense form. It's in by the 15th of then March. Company doesn't even look at it till maybe the 25th of March. As you said, no memory. Now with AI, he spends it on the 1st of Feb. By the 2nd of Feb, he's got an email in his inbox because AI has flagged it to the boss and gone, I'm not sure this is compliant. The FD's gone, I think you're right. Emails go back out to the employee and says, you spent this money yesterday. Can you just confirm how this complies with, and the AI even tells him, this is the policy he's potentially in breach of. Ask him how he's meeting this policy.
Yeah. Or we're going to freeze your card.
Exactly. But the point is, I can remember what I did yesterday. I can't remember what I did 6 weeks ago.
Exactly. So how can you justify a spend that's months ago? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think this is, when we talk about real-time reporting, I think maybe what we should be talking about is real-time questioning, real-time compliance. It's not the reporting of the data that needs to be real-time. It's much more around the checking, flagging, and also, you can imagine an FD goes, I'm not sure that's compliant. If he's then got to work through a 20-page document trying to find which of their policies it's breached, that takes time. On the other hand, what AI can do now is say, see, policy 271, we think it's potentially breached that. And he can go, okay, policy 271, please justify why that's against it. The sales guy can come back and say, well, it was required because of these reasons, gets approved, no hassle. But to me, it's not the reporting, it's the real-time compliance that actually, again, makes the employee's life easier. I think that's exactly the difference.
Yeah, I really believe we get more and more questions from companies that are looking into that real-time data, real-time insights, real-time controls, if you will.
Yeah. I think that's one of the key benefits this whole modern expense management platform brings is that level of control, but it's not negative control, it's positive control. It's making the employee's experience better. And I think that's a key change we're seeing from where we used to be in the old-fashioned days, when I was young doing expenses. Yeah, I've got less, I'm slightly older. But that sort of leads me into my next question of we're seeing a shift, I suppose, towards the office of the CFO in terms of spend management. Expenses becoming part of it.
That's the next trend we've recognized, indeed. A change towards what we would call, indeed, the office of the CFO, which is all about the convergence of spend. So that means CFOs have many different tools, and we see really a convergence of that. So where, like years ago, you would have a different solution for every little piece of process in your company, now we see really the convergence of that. So we see expense management, invoice management, accounts payable. We see companies that are looking for digitization solutions from everything from source to pay.
So it's digitization of the whole spend management, really.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it, indeed. So there's of course in different countries there's different levels of digitization, but we see overall that the office of the CFO really is a trend where CFOs just want to have, well, essentially they just want to have like one dashboard where they can really see all the information, all the data, the insights, and use that to make management decisions.
Now you haven't mentioned one word there, which I've got to ask you about. Therefore, blockchain. You know, it's been forecast for the last 20 years as being taking over the world, but do you see a role? If so, how, where, what? I mean, you haven't mentioned it, so I've got to ask.
I don't think blockchain is a trend right now. I think people have been talking about the blockchain for a long time already, but we don't see a lot of actual use cases in expense management still today. But still, I believe there's a lot to do there. I really believe that for example, with large invoices, and you want to track the source and all the steps that the product went through, or where it's coming from, where that's really important. I think blockchain can play a big role there. What do you think?
I think you've hit the nail on the head then. Anything, it needs to be proportionate. And blockchain, you could argue, is another step up of traceability. So I think what you're really saying here is where you've got more complex things or things with bigger invoices, it becomes part of that spend management where on invoices over X, you want to know the goods left the factory on this date. It's the same goods going in the container, same goods that are being invoiced, being shipped. I think that's where blockchain can come in, so that you know you're paying the right source all the way back.
Yeah, exactly. Does it make a lot of sense to have that if you buy a cup of coffee and add your receipt for it? But here it really comes into play.
I think it's proportionality almost, and I think you're right. It's not a trend, but it's a trend of something we may see coming in, if that makes sense.
Indeed.
So it's not its own trend, but a trend as part of spend management I could see coming in.
And I think the last trend that we recognize is really the convergence of finance and HR functions, where do you see that as well?
I think, right at the beginning, I talked about the user experience, and for many years, I think, employees were almost treated as second-class citizens. Companies believe that they got to treat their customers really well, and they could just do whatever they want to employees, basically. And I think the world has changed for that. You talked about the duty of care and all that. And I think HR departments now these days are becoming very conscious of the need that actually, as much as their job is to find the right people, it's actually to keep the right people. And part of keeping the right people is making their lives better. Now, we've seen flexi working coming in. Of course, some companies still are coming back and saying, we want you in the office 5 days a week. I think they're in the minority. Most are moving to more of a flexible work-life balance type situation. It's one of those things where I see expenses and expense management being part of that. It's all part of really make the HR department saying, yes, I know, Mr. Finance, you need to do certain things, but you need to do it in a manner that allows us to recruit, maintain, and keep the best employees. And that doesn't mean they're spending 3 hours every Friday afternoon sitting down doing expenses. So I think it's almost a pressure from HR saying to FD, you've got to get your act together to make our employees' lives better.
So like the expense process could almost be like a benefit for the employees if you organize it well.
That's an interesting point. That is a really interesting point. We have, sometimes companies do say as a benefit, we have a policy to where employees have been paying out expenses, we pay them at a certain time. I think expense management can actually become an employee benefit if it's done well, because you say we have we all know there are expense processes out there that literally would take a sales guy 3 hours every Friday afternoon filling in paperwork, basically. If you can now give him 3 hours back, that's selling time, that's time to make, to do more productive things that becomes a benefit to the employee.
Yeah, I really agree. I really think COVID was a driver for it as well, because after COVID we saw, of course, a lot of home office coming into play, or employees traveling around the world, being able to work from everywhere. And I really think companies are looking at how can we service these employees with mobility, with benefits, with all kinds of things to make it easy for them to spend wisely, to spend autonomously, for example, but also keeping the control of that spend and what employees are doing. So I think these are the 6 trends now that we've covered. What I think is interesting is to ask also our audience which of these trends will have the most impact on their business. So
as long as they vote quickly.
If they vote quickly. So this is what I want to ask the audience. And don't forget, we are rewarding one of the voters with a nice goodie bag. So and you want to get this goodie bag, guys. So which of these trends do you think will have the most impact on your business? Is it AI-driven spend management, or is it the real-time payment solution that you believe will have the most impact, or carbon accounting and green finance?
Well, it might not have an impact on their business, that one, but it's the importance of it to their business.
Yeah, that's true indeed. Real-time reporting and compliance, or the convergence of spend, the office of the CFO? Or is it the convergence of finance and HR functions? Really seeing HR coming more into play with regards to spend management, organizing, mobility, etc., and home office for employees.
So
Please.
While they're voting now, we each have to pick one of these on what they think they're going to choose as having the biggest impact.
What do you think, David?
I have to say, it's very tempting to go with AI because of what I think it can do in terms of basically reducing the workload of the FD, you see. And I think, therefore, I really do. There's many things in there that can have a big impact. But if I'm looking at the FD, what's going to save me the greatest amount of time? What's going to make my life easy, but also make for an employee the experience best? I see this AI real time coming together. So it's almost a mixture between the AI and the real time. It's the real time compliance driven by AI, if that makes sense. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to go for 1 and 2.
So David, can I ask you to like as a final question? How do you see like expense or spend management, if you will, evolve? Like what will it be in 10 to 15 years? How do you look at that?
Okay, imagine this. I'm home-based. A lot of people are these days. I drive to the railway station, and my company pays for the
parking of
the parking car, and I get on the train and I go in. Today, I've got to get out and pay for that car parking, using some silly app or something normally that never works, or it's a pain. It takes me ages putting in my car registration or clicking this. It's a nightmare. But hang on a minute. My car knows I'm at the railway station. My car knows I'm in the car park. Now, if it knows I'm in the car park, why can't it talk to the car parking app, whatever system, and go, hey, David's parked his car here. Can I pay for car parking, please? Of course you can. Now, the first time it does it, it might send me a push notification saying, do you want to pay for it? And there'll be a little tick box, don't ask this again. I tick that box and go, yes. Thereafter, every time I park my car, I get out the car and I walk to the train. What do I have? What I have, in my view, is the Uber of expense management. I get out, it's taken care of. Surely expense management needs to move towards Uber of expense management. In other words, expenses are taken care of. That's it.
That's a beautiful idea. I hope we can get there, but we are trying to drive that change from within Mobilexpense. Is there any still questions that we need to do? No? Then thanks a lot, guys.
Oh, hey, I've just seen, the vote was for AI.
Oh,
so
really?
actually,
Yeah?
people agree with me. We're going to get to the fact that I can park my car and someone else is going to work out where I've parked and sort it all out for me.
Now, let me talk to our CPO if we can make that happen, guys. Thanks a lot, David. Thanks a lot for your time and joining me today.
Well, that was a very interesting session. We talk about AI and we now know what the big winner is. Imagine we all having some type of a wristband. AI is picking up that we've watched all these incredible speakers and AI is now telling us that it's time for a little bit of a break. We need to fill up on a little